The sudden invasion of the East Shroud by King Manfred of Alamigo in 1468 of the 6th Astral Era shook Eorzea to its roots. Manfred's vaulting ambition caught the eye of the Holy See of Ishgard, which for the first time in several hundred years turned its head, if only briefly, from the all-consuming Dragon Song War. As it turns out, Alamigo wasn't the only nation in the realm which had its entire history built upon the field of battle. Understanding that should Gridania fall, their own eastern border, already significantly less fortified than the one which they shared with their Dravanian foe to the west, would be under threat, Ishgard was only too happy to oblige when entreated for aid by the Seedseers of Gridania. The Holy See petitioned Uldar and Limsa Lominsa to join the fight, and they too, wary of the realm's stability, declared war on Alamigo and sent reinforcements to the exhausted Gridanians. Together, the alliance fell upon the invaders at Tenolka and thwarted them at every turn. Eventually, King Manfred himself marched from Giribania with a legion of pikemen to reinforce General Gilbard and succeeded in slowly pushing the alliance back to East End. But as if channeling the ghost of Vainchalon Whitewater's old plan, they lured the pikemen into the underbrush where their polearms would be ineffective against the masterful archery of the Gridanian bards. The Alamigan champion Gilbard was slain, King Manfred badly wounded, and the battered Alamegans were sent packing back to their barren homeland with broken dreams, shattered bones, and empty hands. The conclusion of the Autumn War had several lasting consequences for Alamigo. Its citizens suffered from an unprecedented period of austerity, which weakened the grip of the royal house, whilst the Fist of Rauga took full advantage of the favour earned by General Gilbard and steadily grew in political influence. The cult of Rauga soon became the official state religion, and the monks of its order were merged into the Alamigan army. Perhaps most importantly, the war had driven a wedge into the already marked divide between Alamigo and the other alliance nations, splitting it into an unbridgeable and fatal ravine. Not all amongst the monkhood were satisfied with their order's newfound hobby for politics. Historically, the structure of the cult had developed organically. In discovering their chakras, focal points through which they could concentrate ether, the monks realized that there were two binary aspects to this power. They described them as the aspects of light and shadow, and they are no doubt an analogy for astral and umbral ethereal affinity. Some monks had a natural proclivity for the light aspect and others for the shadow, and so two distinct sects developed, whom by training and sparring together could reach greater heights of power by opening in one another chakras of the opposing aspect. After the Autumn War, the master of the sect of light considered the proffered alliance with the royal house a grand opportunity for the order, whilst the master of shadow believed that it was a distraction from their true calling that would only bring them ruin. The two factions negotiated in the only way they knew how. The sect of shadow was defeated and its members banished from the order. After 80 years of the monks' meteoric rise and the concurrent decline of the Alamigan royal house, Theodoric I ascended to the throne. He would come to earn a simple and terrifying epithet: the King of Ruin. A megalomaniac with a dream of the golden age of Alamigo that had been enjoyed by his distant forebears, Theodoric was deeply unsettled by the power exercised by the Fist of Rauga, and so he set about quietly designing their excision. The paranoid king also saw conspiracy and treason all around him, and began to find pretenses to purge members of his own family who would ever have any semblance of a claim to the throne. To perform these unspeakable atrocities, he formed a group of loyal executioners and psychopaths, and they were named the Corpse Brigade without a shred of pretense. His young nephew, Theodred, was hidden away in a temple of Rauga before Theodoric could reach him, but the child's parents did not survive, nor any other member of the royal line. At the same time, the King of Ruin declared himself the divine emissary of the goddess Nemea, and categorically outlawed any worship of Rauga. As he no doubt had planned, the monks of the Fist of Rauga revolted, and Theodoric used this pretext to have a number of their leaders arrested and tortured into confessing a plot to seize the throne. The king led his army to surround the main temple of Rauga, and the surviving outcasts of the sect of Shadow were more than happy to volunteer for the expedition. both to take revenge on their faithless brothers and as an opportunity to open their remaining chakras in combat against their light counterparts. The temple burned and the monks were slaughtered. The servants and hired hands, the children and elderly, the refugees they cared for, all washed away in a tide of blood, save only, and miraculously, the child Theodred, or as we now know him, Vidargeld. Whilst the King of Ruin conducted his internal reign of terror, the burgeoning Garlean Empire consolidated their conquest of the Far East and turned their attention to Girabanya. Without aid offered by or requested of the neighbouring Eorzean states, Theodoric was forced to dispatch the majority of his military resources to the border. Among them were the noble-hearted young officer Rauban al-Din and his comrade Ilberd Fear. In the capital, the Corpse Brigade widened their net for daily public beheadings to target nobles, merchants, and anyone else with a shred of public influence. When the suffering of her people became intolerable, the Queen herself conspired to assassinate the tyrant, and following her failure and execution, the streets ran red. Whilst outside the city, the royal army strained against the tide of the 14th Imperial Legion. Rauban earned the acclaim of his compatriots and was quickly promoted to high command after a string of impressive victories, but after 2 years of fighting on the front line, he was shot by an Imperial sniper, terribly wounded, and forced to withdraw to his home village in the remote mountains of Girabanya to convalesce. Finally, in 1557, a popular rebellion commanded by Gundobald and Hext, father of Ida and Lys Hext, stormed the palace with the complicity of the royal guard. With uncharacteristic lucidity, Theodoric committed suicide before the mob could reach him. The Pyrrhic victory of the rebels was to be incredibly short-lived. In the chaos of the following days, Imperial Legatus Gaius van Belsar and his 14th Legion easily broke through the Alamegan forces that hadn't yet scattered, and marched into the capital with nary a hand raised in opposition. One of these hands was that of Hext, whom after begging his daughters to flee, turned to face oblivion at the hands of an even greater enemy than that which he had so long fought to topple. Lys is certain that he died fighting. It has been often speculated in hindsight that the ever-escalating madness and paranoia of Theodoric, as well as the seeds of rebellion, were machinated by Baelsar in order to secure an easy victory, and that the faux war he had been waging was nothing more than a ploy to plunge Alamigo into further chaos, with little real cost to Baelsar's own forces. Given the Legatus' known collaboration with the Ascian Laha Brea, it is not difficult to imagine that the Paragons themselves had been pulling at the strings which unraveled from the Mad King's mind. In any case, the crippled Alamigo was annexed practically overnight. Some citizens, rebels like Gundobald, and soldiers like Rauban and Ilberd managed to escape Girabanya before Baelsar had completely secured the region, seeking refuge amongst their estranged and often outright hostile neighbours, whilst vowing to someday return and drive the Empire from their homeland. But most were quickly rounded up and encircled. At first, the security and stability of imperial rule would have been a relief to many beleaguered Alamegans after centuries of decline and strife culminating in the monstrous tyranny of Theodoric. The rule of law was re-established, even if it was a law that favoured their conquerors, and Garlemald brought a stable industry to the region which Alamigo had so long lacked in the form of magitech production. Baelsar was known for his relative respect for foreign races, uncharacteristic for a Garlean native, and made a far more tolerable viceroy than perhaps any other legatus could have. So it was that Alamigo was assimilated into the Garlean war machine, and in only 5 years it was prepared to roll out once more for a full-scale invasion of central Eorzea. The Sharlayans had made their preparations to abandon the realm, and the remaining states had hardly finished the political games necessary to organize an alliance before an impossibly large imperial armada flew directly into Mordona at the heart of Eorzea. There was no time to mobilize a defense. It was only the slumbering guardian Midgard Zormer and his influence over the hordes of Dravania that safeguarded the realm that day. The Black Wolf was forced to retreat to Alamigo, and after Primal started appearing across Eorzea, he dropped an iron curtain between Girabanya and the rest of the realm. The strongest and most fortunate of the Alamegan refugees worked for scraps as mercenaries or miners throughout central Eorzea, particularly in the employ of the monetarists of Uldar and their private armies. Many were not so lucky. Alamegans seeking solace in the Twelveswood were more often than not subjected to the Green Wrath, the elementals, and subsequently the entire forest itself turning against them. And in Thanalan they built shanty towns in the dust and slowly starved. The majority of these last two groups eventually gathered in southern Thanalan, where Gundobald, the old hero of the rebellion, had raised a settlement in the caverns of a great mesa amidst the hostile heart of Belladine ruins and Amaljar encampments, and named it Little Alamego, from whence the expatriates orchestrated their resistance and guerrilla warfare against the invaders of their homeland. They shared this corner of Thanalan with the survivors of the despicable Corpse Brigade, whom had taken residence in nearby Belladine ruins, but Theodoric's former executioners were more interested in banditry and random murder than liberating their homes. Acilia Ward, known to us as Minfilia, was another child refugee of Alamego. Her father was a spy in the employ of Garlemald, but loyal to the Resistance, meaning to feed Imperial intelligence to the Uldans, but killed in a tragic accident upon arrival in the city with his young daughter, leaving Minfilia an orphan taken into the care of Flamin Kesh. The even less fortunate Ralban al-Din was mislabeled an Imperial spy upon first travelling to Uldar and imprisoned, forced for over a decade to fight as a gladiator on the Colosseum blood sands for the entertainment of the nation's aristocracy. After his 1000th victory, the child Sultana Nanamo ul-Namo pardoned Ralban and found in him a faithful ally, mentor, and protector after he used his winnings to purchase the Colosseum and subsequently a seat on the ruling syndicate of Uldar. Ralban soon reinstated and took command of the Immortal Flames as the standing army and grand company for the states, and employed a brigade of his former countrymen to serve, but he never yet marched directly on Girabanya, much to the chagrin and despair of the resistance, and in particular his old comrade, Ilbert Fear. As we will see in the next part, this despair slowly simmered within this tragic man who would soon prove to be a landmine set below the complacency of Eorzean and Garlean alike, a catalyst for an as yet unwritten chapter in the history of Alamego.